hadn't always been easy, and he had been a role model for a lot of young Pacific Islanders.
Your fall from grace is a punishment in itself.
He said Vatuvei could choose to live a better life upon release when he'll be 39 years old.
Your final legacy in the community does not have to be defined by what has happened today. It can be defined by what you choose to do from today onwards. When you are released, you will still have a lot of your life to live, and it's clear that you will have the ongoing love and support of your wider family and friends.
Vatuvei, who was on bail, was sentenced to 3 years and 7 months in prison.
And that was Jordan Bond reporting. E te iwi e haere akine e Checkpoint. COVID delays kick-off for yet another sports competition. Calling all amateur detectives, we need your help reuniting a bunch of travel buddies from the 70s. And cauliflower has never tasted so damn expensive. We will explain why. Homai o whakaro, send us feedback on anything on the program. Text us on 2101 or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. It is time now for the headlines. Ko iwi anō tēnei.
The police have reclaimed Parliament grounds nearly 12 hours after launching a major operation. Protesters set tents on fire this afternoon and threw bottles and other objects at officers who were advancing onto grounds and pushing back the protesters. The police have also reclaimed Molesworth Street, clashing with a crowd of people when they reached the bottom. However, there are still hundreds of people in the area. At least 38 people have been arrested today and face charges including trespass, obstruction,
Good afternoon. At 6 a.m. this morning, the police began an operation to clear the Parliament and surrounding area of an unlawful occupation that has gone on for 22 days. I know that in planning for that operation, the police expected there would be hostility, resistance and violence. They planned for that because that is what they and Wellingtonians have experienced for several weeks now. And while they had planned for that, it is another thing entirely to witness it. To our frontline police and emergency and fire services, you have our deep admiration and our thanks. You have been calm but resolute in trying to bring this occupation to a conclusion. It has come at great risk to your personal safety. Thank you for putting others before yourselves. We have all at times felt angry during this occupation. After all, when we're in the middle of a pandemic, have 400 people hospitalised and 20,000 people becoming sick in just one day, it's almost impossible to comprehend that people would stand opposed to efforts to slow that down and to help care for our most vulnerable. One day, it will be our job to try and understand how a group of people could succumb to such wild and dangerous mis- and disinformation. And while many of us have seen that disinformation and dismissed it as conspiracy theory, a small portion of our society have not only believed it, they have acted upon it in an extreme and violent way. That cannot stand. We have a difficult journey in front of us to address the underlying cause of what we have seen here today. But in doing so, we will never, ever excuse it. It was an attack on our frontline police. It was an attack on our Parliament. It was an attack on our values, and it was wrong. And the reason it would have shaken so many to witness it is because it stands so completely against not just our response to COVID, but who we are as people. But we will not be defined by this. This pandemic will not be defined by the hard conversations we've all had these past few years. Our people will not be defined by a small handful of protesters. Our country will not be defined by the dismantling of an occupation. In fact, when we look back at this period in our history, I hope we remember one thing. Together, thousands more lives were saved over the past 2 years by your actions as New Zealanders than were on that front lawn of Parliament today. The sacrifices we were all willing to make to look after one another, that is what will define us. No protest, no fire, no placards will ever change that. Today, the police will restore order, and tomorrow, your government will continue to work hard to get us safely back to the normality everyone deserves. I'm now happy to take your questions. Yeah, Lillian. I was both angry and also deeply saddened. To see the Parliament, your Parliament, our Parliament, desecrated in that way, and a children's playground destroyed by a small group of illegal protesters, made me feel both angry and deeply sad. But as I say, it is not something that will define New Zealand's response to this pandemic.
Prime Minister, what would be... Those trespassers, as you say, they set fire to a children's playground on the People's Front lawn. Is this why you refuse to go down and talk to them?
This demonstrates one of the reasons why we refuse to engage with that group. It was an illegal occupation. They engaged in hostile, violent and aggressive behaviour throughout the occupation. And today that has culminated in the desecration of this Parliament's grounds, the People's Parliament, our democracy. But I am absolutely committed. We will restore those grounds and we will not be defined by one act by a small group of people.
Prime Minister,
Jason.
Today we've seen people hurl projectiles at police and firemen trying to put out the fires that the protesters started. What is your message to those that are engaging in that behaviour?
There are words I cannot use in this environment for what I saw today, but I felt the same anger that I know many New Zealanders would have felt witnessing the hurling of basically weapons that people were able to get their hands on, LPG bottles thrown onto flames. Currently, we have cobblestones being hurled at police. It is still a live event. I felt both anger at what I was seeing, but I also felt resolute in what I was seeing. What we have done as New Zealanders has been the right thing to look after one another. And what we've seen in response to that has been completely wrong. To our police, our firefighters, our frontline services, time and time again, they show us the lengths they're willing to go to look after us. And I know that we are deeply grateful for those acts today. I do. I have managed to speak with the police commissioner. There have been various injuries amongst our frontline police today, most of which have been able to be treated on site. I will leave it to him to go into more detail at this stage.
And a lot of the protesters have been seen to be sort of pouring milk over their eyes. Do you have any update on whether they've actually been used sort of tear gas? Or?
I do not believe that has been the case. I imagine right now the fires that they have created along the forecourt of Parliament or the front of Parliament, including by the War Memorial, is causing more distress than some of what the police would have engaged in today. I do not believe that was used, but it would be for the police to speak to whatever was utilised to keep them and others safe today.
Right up until late this afternoon, parents still had their children on the lawn. What did you make of seeing that today?
The presence of children all the way through this occupation has hampered the efforts of police, because police have rightly been mindful of the presence of those children. Today I saw myself children present. It was in much smaller numbers than what we've seen previously, but I know the police were mindful in all of their engagement of their presence. We did have other agencies there today, and they were present should there have been a situation where, for instance, adults who are engaging in behaviour that may have led to arrest, should there have been children who are left unsupervised or uncared for, there was preparations made for that eventuality.
But what do you make of parents who are willing to put their children in that sort of danger?
I don't have words for it.
Prime Minister, today the protesters have been cleared off. Tomorrow the clean-up begins.
Yeah.
But also, this has revealed a pretty radical element
Yeah.
there. What advice have you received, or are police or intelligence services pretty much at heightened alert for the possibility?
No, there's nothing to suggest that our security settings as a country need to change. I think, to put it in perspective, I was advised by the police commissioner that we had in the order of 270 protesters who were causing the acts of violence and destruction we saw on the front lawn of Parliament today. That demonstrates that actually it takes only a relatively small group of people who are committed to destruction to cause it should they so choose. But it also demonstrates that it was not a large group who were engaging in those acts either. You'll have heard me say today, we are not going to dismiss some of the underlying causes of what we've seen, but nor will we excuse it. So as we go through a process of assessing what is it that has allowed that growth in mis and disinformation in this country and how do we address that, we will be at pains to ensure that it never becomes an excuse for the violent acts that it resulted in. The final thing I'd say is there has all the way through been an element to this occupation that has not felt like New Zealand, and that's because it's not. There has been foreign influence in what we've seen, maybe not in the traditional terms that we know it, but in terms of the disinformation that has been sourced out of other countries. That is something that we will have to tackle, but so too will other democracies, because it's a dangerous place when citizens are led into spaces where they believe so deeply in conspiracy theory that they act with such violence. Mark?
Over the past year, intelligence agencies have briefed Minister Little and maybe yourself on the security risk that misinformation and disinformation poses, particularly in relation to the anti-vaccine movement. Are you confident that the government has done enough to sort of prepare for this eventuality and to try and head it off?
I think that there's every democracy that we would perhaps compare ourselves to is facing this similar issue, and one of the difficulties is that alongside that growth in disinformation, it is accompanied by a growth in distrust of traditional forms of or access to information, such as mainstream media, and also distrust in government. So the very channels that we have open to us to try and counter disinformation become seen as part of the problem by those who are succumbing to it. It is a complex issue. Government will not be able to solve it alone, particularly given the growth in people accessing information in those non-mainstream platforms and media. But it is something that that we all need to address because the result of it can be these extreme acts that we've seen today. Joe. Oh, sorry, Mark, I'll let you finish.
Do you see big tech companies as having some responsibility for this sort of thing? You know, the worst content is on minor platforms, but people only get there through something like Facebook or Instagram.
Yeah, I think the question is who's implicated in the solution, who needs to be part of the solution. And they do, yes. I mean, ultimately, there are all individuals who have their own responsibility for their acts who are involved here, and we can't take away from that. But do we all have a role to play in finding those solutions? Yes, we do.
There's still people out there.
Do you mind if I just come to Joe?
Andrew Costa said this morning that it was a couple of days ago that was the tipping point, and obviously they've spent that time working out the operation and getting the number of police that we've seen here into Wellington.
Yeah.
What sort of, I guess, level of detail were you informed of in terms of that operation, and is what has played out today and what you've seen gone beyond, I guess, what you were prepared for on the basis of the conversations you had?
No, look, I would not expect to be given a briefing that would go into the tactical or operational decisions by the police. Particularly because those are ultimately decisions for them. When I have been briefed, it's been often about giving me an indication of the scale of an operation, perhaps what they hope to achieve with it, what time it may begin, and what they may see a conclusion to that operation as. So I was informed when they took that phase one of the bollards. I was informed yesterday that they would undertake this activity today. When you ask, was I prepared for this kind of action? Look, all of us will have seen some of the rhetoric coming out of the group that have been down there for 22 days. You yourselves have confronted it quite directly. You've seen the level of anger that has existed in that group. So whilst it has not surprised me, it has nonetheless left me feeling deeply sad at what I witnessed.
There are still people down there. There's still hurling abuse and projectiles at police. What's your message to them right now?
Well, actually, my hope is they put down their weapons long enough for the police to arrest them.
The operation is still ongoing, but eventually when it wraps up, can Wellingtonians, I guess, and New Zealanders broader feel safe now?
Yes, they can. And one of the sad things is that we know that there has been a group of New Zealanders who have been living in the margins, who have previously subscribe to other conspiracy theories, and we're all familiar with those. And this happens to be the current rallying cry. So yes, they have congregated, but as I say, 270 it fell to at its conclusion. My message to Wellingtonians, this was specifically a point that the Commissioner wished to make. There will be a substantial police presence in the aftermath of this in the Wellington area. I want to reassure Wellingtonians that yes, this has been a very distressing period for them, but the police will continue to make sure their presence is felt, that they are there to keep them safe and that order is restored.
This isn't the only occupation. Others have popped up around the country inspired by this. I guess, what's your message to them, and are you worried about violence potentially breaking out elsewhere?
And look, I think the point that the police have continually made, and we have too, there is a place for peaceful protest in this country. There always has been. But the reason that this feels so alien to us is because it has this almost imported feel to it. This is not how New Zealanders let their voice be heard in our history or in our present. This is not the way that we engage in protest. And so I would simply send the message that peaceful protest is the way to send a message. This is the way to end up before the courts. Yeah, Justin.
Well, this has been called a protest. It's been called an occupation. Is this a riot now?
Well, certainly what you will have witnessed, that is how I would have defined it. I mean, there were very small numbers. And so again, I just want to put emphasis on that, because I think one of the things that New Zealanders will be feeling really aggrieved by is somehow this is projected as being a reflection of New Zealand. It is not. The numbers are very small. But you will have seen that the police response very much acknowledged that when you start hurling weapons, makeshift weapons, creating fires, then it's very much tipped even from occupation.
Prime Minister,
Jason.
Will there just be any tolerance for a return to this tomorrow? Because as Jason has pointed out, and I'm getting ongoing reports, it's going on outside, it's spreading throughout, a little further away from the parliamentary precinct. Will anyone be allowed to come back at dawn tomorrow?
The police will be present. In smaller numbers, what I understand is that we've got even a much more diminished number now. I've been advised over the course of the day we've had, we believe, about 60 arrests, but I imagine that the police will want to do final tallies at the conclusion of the day. Around 30 towed vehicles. What those numbers won't necessarily reflect are those who chose to leave, both with their vehicles or just themselves, when they saw the rapid escalation of what was occurring amongst the protest group. And so the number we have left now, I've been told, is a few dozen. I don't know if that's completely accurate. I can't get a good sight on it myself.
Do you know if there were any police burned or injured as a result of the fires?
When I asked the police commissioner about the welfare and safety of his officers, he gave no indication that there had been. But keeping in mind at the time that we were engaging, we were just past the period where the height of the fires had been occurring, so I wouldn't want to get ahead of that. But as I said, for the most part, the injuries have been treated on site. There have been a number of injuries over the course of this occupation, though, and I've heard the Commissioner talk about the number of staff who have either been taken out with injury or with COVID, of which there have been a number. Luke, I might finish with you. Sorry, Mark.
That's okay. The Royal Commission report into the mosque attacks concluded that social cohesion was a really important tool for combating extremism, but those policies from the government are still just being consulted on. There's nothing that's concrete that's been sort of proposed. Is that work going quickly enough, and is that for you a foundation or a cornerstone of it?
I would see it as a foundation. Very much. A lot of the policies that that people use as examples of having an evidence base in the social cohesion space, very much are long-term practices and principles that you embed very early on. Not the kind of thing that I think deal with the immediacy of disinformation and misinformation. So, as I said, we have a challenge in front of us, but so do many democracies. And we'll actually only find those resolutions together. And it's not about taking away people's ability to have differing opinions, to have debate, to take different positions and stands. People should, of course, always have that freedom of thought and view and perspective, and in New Zealand we've celebrated that. But when the debate you're having is no longer based on fact, where does that take you? And that's the challenge we have. All right, thank you, everyone.